The most dangerous man is the one who doesn't need anyone, Nietzsche, Marcus Aurelius. There is a moment in every human life when we look around and suddenly wonder how much of our behavior, our choices, our emotions, and even our identity depend on other people. We rarely admit it, but most of us are more influenced by the world than we'd ever like to confess. We fear disappointing others, fear judgment, fear abandonment. We fear being alone. But above all, we fear the terrifying responsibility of becoming someone who doesn't need anyone. And that's exactly why the person who reaches that level emotionally, mentally, spiritually is the most dangerous man alive. Not dangerous in the sense of harm, but dangerous in the sense of being untouchable, unmanipulable, unshakable, and unbelievably free. Think about the way we normally live. We chase approval, validation, connection, attention, affection, praise. Even the strongest of us often organize our lives around how others will perceive us. But what if you reached a point where external validation was meaningless? What if you could genuinely stand alone, just like Nietzsche's Übermensch or Marcus Aurelius's Stoic sage, unbothered by opinion, unmoved by pressure, capable of existing fully within yourself? That level of inner independence reshapes a human being into something rare, something powerful, something society cannot control.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Let me ask you a question that might cut deeper than you expect. If every person you rely on emotionally disappeared tomorrow, who would you be? What habits would remain? What beliefs would survive? What fears would emerge? What strengths would finally appear? Most people avoid this question because it reveals the uncomfortable truth that their sense of self is built on dependency, not identity. We fear loneliness not because we dislike solitude, but because without the presence of others, we're forced to face the raw, unfiltered version of ourselves. And Nietzsche understood this better than anyone. He believed that personal greatness requires a form of psychological solitude, a separation from the collective noise, the herd mentality, the social expectations that shape ordinary people. To him, the strongest man is not the one who dominates himself. And domination of the self requires a courage most people never develop, the courage to be alone with your own thoughts, your own weaknesses, your own contradictions, your own desires. Marcus Aurelius saw the same truth from a different angle. As Emperor of Rome, he learned that even surrounded by power, advisors, soldiers, citizens, friends, and family, the only true domain he controlled was his inner world. Everything else, wealth, relationships, reputation, was outside his control. To need those things was to be enslaved by them. To release dependence on them was to achieve the internal sovereignty that makes a person unshakable. This brings us to the heart of the dilemma. Most of us think we want freedom, strength, independence, but we avoid the very path that leads there. Because the path begins where we least want to look inside ourselves. When you rely on others for emotional stability, they can destabilize you. When you rely on others for validation, they can invalidate you. When you rely on others for confidence, they can destroy you. But when you learn to rely on yourself truly, deeply, you eliminate the leverage the world has over you. Consider this: how many of your decisions are shaped by silent fear? Fear of rejection, fear of being judged, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being alone. These fears hold more power over people than logic, wisdom, or ambition ever could. But the man who no longer fears these things becomes unpredictable. He becomes someone the world cannot guilt, cannot shame, cannot pressure, cannot manipulate. That is why he is dangerous. Not to others, but to any system, person, or structure that benefits from his weakness. The great paradox is that independence doesn't mean isolation. It means choosing people out of strength, not out of emotional necessity. It means being able to walk away from anyone or anything that compromises your truth. And that makes you someone people must respect even if they don't want to. When you don't need anyone, you can love people more honestly. Because you no longer love them out of desperation. You love them out of genuine connection. When you don't need approval, you can pursue your purpose more boldly. When you don't fear loneliness, you can make decisions that align with your deeper values, not your temporary insecurities. But here is the uncomfortable truth. To reach this level of independence, you must face your inner world completely. Nietzsche called this process becoming who you are. Marcus Aurelius described it as returning to yourself again and again until the external world loses its grip on your mind. This level of self-mastery requires a psychological confrontation that most people avoid their entire lives. Because confronting yourself means facing the parts of you that are weak, insecure, fearful, or unhealed. It means learning to generate your own emotional stability instead of leaning on others for it. It means discovering whether your dreams belong to you or to the expectations placed on you. It means questioning whether the life you've built is your life at all or a collage created from other people's influences. So let me ask you one more question, one that may echo for days. What would you become if you stopped needing people to make you feel strong, accepted, worthy, or important? If you can answer that honestly, you're already stepping onto the path that leads to becoming the kind of man Nietzsche admired. The kind of man Marcus Aurelius embodied, the one who doesn't need anyone and therefore becomes someone the world cannot break. Why emotional independence is the highest form of power. Most people think power comes from dominance, money, influence, physical strength, social status, intelligence. But the older you get, the more you see the truth that Nietzsche, Marcus Aurelius, and every great philosopher understood. Those forms of power are fragile. They depend on circumstances, luck, and the approval of others. They can be taken, lost, destroyed, or manipulated. But emotional independence, the ability to remain grounded, clear-minded, and sovereign regardless of who comes or goes, is unstealable. It's the form of power that can't be bought, inherited, or granted. It can only be built from within, and once you have it, the world has no leverage over you. Let's think about this. How many of your worst decisions were made from emotional dependence? How many times have you lowered your standards because you feared losing someone? How many times have you stayed silent because you feared conflict? How many dreams have you abandoned because someone disapproved? How many relationships have you tolerated because you feared being alone? Every time you let fear dictate your behavior, you surrendered your power. Every time. And the most dangerous man, the man who doesn't need anyone, has eliminated this vulnerability entirely. Emotional independence means you don't rely on anyone to feel complete. You don't rely on praise to feel capable. You don't rely on someone's affection to feel worthy. You don't rely on someone's presence to feel whole. You choose people because they enrich your life, not because they fill an inner void. This distinction is everything. Because once you remove the need, the world becomes a playground instead of a prison. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a person's tranquility depends entirely on what he allows to affect him. This wasn't some poetic ideal, it was a survival strategy. As emperor, he couldn't afford to lose himself in the chaos around him. One emotional reaction could cost thousands of lives, provoke political disaster, or destabilize an empire. He had to become the kind of man who could stand in the middle of crises with the same calmness he held in solitude. That level of internal stability is what emotional independence produces. And it is the foundation of unbreakable power. Nietzsche took it further. He believed that dependence turns you into a slave of circumstance. If someone else's approval determines your mood, then that person owns your emotions. If someone's presence determines your peace, then that person owns your peace. If someone's opinion determines your identity, then that person owns your identity. Nietzsche argued that the path to greatness requires reclaiming ownership of the self, refusing to place your emotional life in anyone else's hands. And he was right. But let me ask you something piercing. How often do you allow other people to dictate your emotional weather? How many times has a single message, silence, argument, or rejection ruined your entire day? How many times has the presence or absence of someone changed the way you saw yourself? Emotional dependence always comes with a price, and the price is freedom. Emotional independence is not isolation, it's mastery. It's the ability to stay rooted in who you are, no matter what storms come. When you have this power, people can disappoint you, criticize you, leave you, betray you, and you remain whole. Not because you don't feel pain, but because pain no longer fractures your identity. But here is where the transformation becomes even more interesting. Once you reach emotional independence, your relationships become healthier, not colder. Because now, you enter relationships as a complete person, not a half looking for completion. You don't cling, manipulate, fear, chase, or sacrifice yourself to keep someone. You communicate honestly because you're not terrified of losing them. You set boundaries because you're no longer driven by desperation. You love more deeply because your love is not corrupted by need. This is why emotionally independent people attract respect. They carry a presence, a certainty, a calm confidence that people can feel. They don't wobble. They don't collapse under pressure. They don't seek validation. They don't perform to be liked. They don't change themselves to fit in. They walk through life with the quiet strength that comes from having already faced their own inner chaos. So here's the question that will reveal how close you are to this level of power. If every source of external validation disappeared today, would your sense of worth collapse or remain intact? Your answer tells you everything about who you are right now. In the next part, we will dive deeper into the truth most people fear. The journey to becoming someone who doesn't need anyone requires facing the self in a way the average person avoids their entire life. Why facing yourself is the rite of passage into becoming unshakable. If emotional independence is the highest form of power, then facing yourself is the initiation ritual. And this is precisely why almost no one becomes the kind of man Marcus Aurelius embodied, because the journey demands a level of inner confrontation most humans instinctively avoid. It requires peeling back every illusion, every insecurity, every convenience, every justification you've used to hide from your own truth. It requires sitting in silence long enough for the noise inside you to settle. It requires looking into the psychological mirror and seeing not who you pretend to be, but who you truly are beneath all the layers you've accumulated. It is a raw, almost violent form of honesty. And it is the reason most people remain dependent on others for validation, direction, and identity. They are terrified of meeting the self that emerges when all distractions are stripped away. Think about how the average person lives, constantly surrounded by noise, constantly connected, constantly stimulated, constantly occupied. Silence is rare. Stillness is rare. Introspection is uncomfortable. Yet Nietzsche insisted that solitude is the furnace in which greatness is forged. He believed that the individual must withdraw from the herd, step away from the collective mind, and face the existential weight of his own being. And what happens when you do that? You see yourself clearly, brutally clearly. All your contradictions, all your fears, all your self-betrayal, all your untapped potential, all your excuses. It's not pretty, but it's necessary. Marcus Aurelius faced the same inner battle. As emperor, he kept a journal, his private confessions to himself, because he understood that external power meant nothing if the internal self was weak. He wrote reminders, corrections, rebukes, and instructions not for an audience, but to maintain a dialogue with his true nature. He was surrounded by thousands of people at all times, yet he fought to maintain inner solitude. Because he knew the truth. If you cannot rule your own mind, you will always be ruled by someone else's. Let me ask you something that may make you pause. When was the last time you sat alone without a phone, a screen, a distraction, or another person and truly listened to what your mind was saying? Not the surface thoughts, but the deeper ones. The ones you usually silence with busyness. The ones that reveal what you really fear, what you really desire, what you've been pretending not to know. Most people never do this because they feel anxiety rising the moment they're alone. But that anxiety is not loneliness. It's truth breaking through. Self-confrontation is the gate you must walk through if you want to become someone who doesn't need anyone. Because dependence always has a root, and that root is an unexamined part of yourself. If you depend on people for validation, it means you haven't validated yourself. If you depend on relationships to distract you, it means something inside you is unsettled. If you depend on approval, it means you haven't cultivated internal certainty. In other words, dependence is a symptom. The disease is avoidance of self. The most dangerous man, the one who doesn't need anyone, isn't emotionally detached. He's emotionally integrated. He has faced every part of himself. He knows what he believes. He knows what he stands for. He knows what he will and won't tolerate. He knows how to regulate his emotions. He knows his wounds. He knows his desires. He knows his weaknesses and doesn't hide from them. He knows his strengths and doesn't exaggerate them. He is whole because he has taken the time to gather every scattered piece of himself. Here's something most people don't realize. Freedom isn't found by cutting others out of your life, it's found by cutting your internal chains. If you reject people before they reject you, you're not independent, you're afraid. If you isolate yourself to avoid vulnerability, you're not strong, you're guarded. If you brag about needing no one but panic when alone, you're not powerful, you're fragmented. True independence doesn't come from distancing yourself from the world, but from integrating your inner world so fully that no external influence has the ability to control it. So let me ask you a question that will reveal your entire level of inner development. If every distraction disappeared right now and you had to sit with your unfiltered mind for 1 full hour, would you feel peace or panic? Your reaction to that question tells you whether you're on the path to becoming unshakable or still trapped in the psychological dependency Nietzsche tried to free humanity from. In the final part, we will explore the ultimate transformation. How becoming someone who doesn't need anyone doesn't make you cold or detached. It makes you a man who loves, leads, and lives with a level of authenticity and strength the world rarely sees. How becoming someone who needs no one turns you into someone the world can't break. There is a misconception about the man who doesn't need anyone. People imagine someone cold, detached, emotionless, someone who rejects connection and isolates himself. But that's not strength, that's fear posing as independence. True independence is something entirely different. It is not the absence of connection. It is the absence of dependency. It is the ability to choose people, not chase them, not cling to them, not collapse without them. It is the inner stability that allows you to love freely, lead boldly, and live authentically because your identity is anchored within, not scattered across the perceptions of others. And when you reach that level, you become someone the world cannot break. To reach this state, you must understand something profound. Emotional neediness is the most exploitable weakness a human being can have. Anyone can manipulate you if you need their approval. Anyone can control you if you fear losing them. Anyone can pressure you if you cannot tolerate disapproval. Anyone can intimidate you if you rely on them for validation. But when you no longer need anyone to feel whole, a quiet power rises within you. You stop being reactive. You stop being afraid. You stop being pulled and pushed by other people's emotions, demands, and expectations. And for the first time in your life, you start acting from who you truly are. Imagine this version of yourself. You walk into any room without adjusting your personality to fit in. You speak your truth without rehearsing how others will interpret it. You set boundaries without guilt. You leave situations that drain you without hesitation. You pursue your purpose even when no one claps. You trust yourself even when others doubt you. That is the identity Nietzsche believed could reshape the world, the self-governing individual who stands on his own foundation, not the foundation society imposed on him. Marcus Aurelius lived this out in the most extreme conditions. As emperor, he had advisors, generals, senators, citizens, millions of people looking to him. Yet he wrote in his journal, again and again, that a man must retreat into the inner fortress of his mind. Not to escape life, but to return to it stronger. Not to detach from others, but to meet them with clarity. Not to avoid pain, but to endure it with dignity. This inner fortress wasn't a wall, it was a compass. And that compass guided him through war, betrayal, grief, responsibility, and pressure without ever losing himself. This is the essence of the man who doesn't need anyone. He has built an inner architecture that cannot be collapsed by external events. He carries himself with a calmness that others instinctively feel. His presence is grounded. His emotions are regulated. His decisions are aligned. His boundaries are firm. His purpose is unwavering. And the world respects him not because he demands respect, but because his self-respect radiates from him. When you reach this level, your relationships transform. You no longer choose people who drain you, disrespect you, or destabilize you because your inner stability refuses to tolerate them. You attract people who are equally grounded, equally aligned. Your love becomes purer because it isn't corrupted by fear. Your friendships become deeper because they aren't rooted in need. Your leadership becomes stronger because it isn't driven by insecurity. Your presence becomes magnetic because it isn't diluted by the noise of inner chaos. And here's the greatest irony. Once you become someone who doesn't need anyone, you finally become capable of loving people fully, because you are no longer trying to extract worth from them. You give freely rather than bargaining for affection. You connect from abundance, not scarcity. You become generous because you are no longer afraid. This is what Nietzsche meant when he said, "The higher man must overcome himself," and what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." So the final question, the one that determines whether you will merely admire this philosophy or embody it, is this: if every illusion of need was stripped away from you, if every emotional dependency dissolved, who would you be? And are you willing to meet that version of yourself even if it means letting go of who you've been. Because the moment you answer yes, you begin the transformation into the man the world cannot sway, disturb, or break, the man who doesn't need anyone, and therefore becomes the most powerful version of himself.